This week, we witnessed one of the most grubby political stunts disguised as legitimate journalism that I think I've ever seen. 10's political editor, Peter Van Onselen, stood up at the National Press Gallery and read out what he claims are years-old text messages between Gladys Berejiklian and a sitting federal Liberal minister.
Prime Minister, at the start of your speech, you mentioned your close friendship with Marise Payne. I wanted to ask you about another close friend, Gladys Berejiklian, and there's somebody that you wanted to run, actually, at the next election. I've been provided with a text message exchange between the former New South Wales Premier and a current Liberal Cabinet Minister. I've got them right here. In one, she describes you as, quote, a horrible, horrible person, going on to say she did not trust you and you're more concerned with politics than people. The minister is even more scathing, describing you as a fraud and, quote, a complete psycho. Does this exchange surprise you? And what do you think it tells us?
Well, I don't know who you're referring to or the basis of what you've put to me, but I obviously don't agree with it, and I don't think that's my record.
Van Onselen, known colloquially as PVO, has refused to release the text messages or name the alleged sitting minister, despite there being immense public interest to know who that person is. Instead, PVO claims he did a secret deal with this person and promised to protect their identity in return for a few messages hurling schoolyard insults. And this is where journalists can become political pawns. This is where journalism becomes activism and a petty stunt dominates the headlines. And now the coalition has come out swinging, suggesting that there is no sitting federal minister at all involved in these text messages. Here is Health Minister Greg Hunt responding to a question from our very own Peter Stefanovic about whether the coalition believes the texts were made up.
I think the simplest thing is for the journalist in question just to release the material by this.
So you think he's making it up?
I do not believe that this has been done or sent by a federal minister. My clear categorical view is I do not believe this has been done by a federal minister.
Now, of course, PVO refutes this and is adamant his source is the author of the texts and that they are a serving federal minister. But without evidence, no one should take this claim seriously. And more to the point, releasing anonymous text messages which carry this much hostility so close to an election is a bold move. So why on earth did PVO do this? Well, at 1:14 p.m. on the same day PVO leaked those allegedly real text messages and bombarded the news cycle with headlines of our horrible Prime Minister, this story dropped. Yes, PVO was having his own crisis of collegial criticisms. The Age and the City Morning Herald were running strong with details of a pending federal court case against Network 10, which named their star political editor PVO himself. So former press gallery journalist Tegan George has alleged PVO is part of a toxic culture, and the disagreement between George and 10 Network is so heated it has ended up in court. So PVO is sitting in the National Press Gallery, surrounded by his colleagues when this story drops, naming him. And coincidentally, he gets up and lobs a grenade at the Prime Minister, which he knows would create headline after headline. All of a sudden, a complicated Fair Work allegation story moves down the list. And I have to congratulate the ABC's Virginia Trioli for refusing to let PVO get away with appearing on her program to spruik his scoop without addressing the allegations he faced himself.
Peter Van Onselen, according to those text messages, he's a complete psycho. But according to a statement of claim that's been filed against Channel 10 in the federal court, you're crazy. So do you and the Prime Minister have this in common?
We will have to wait and see how this plays out in court before casting judgment on PVO. But we can certainly grade his performance at the press club this week. And for that stunt, he gets a fail. Now let's bring in the panel. I'm joined by broadcaster Kel Richards and Director of Communications at the IPA, Evan Mulholland. Evan, let's start with you. What did you make of that entire saga, the stunt, the way that PVO was in this story, this damning story, about 20 minutes before he pulled the stunt? What is your take on the situation?
Well, I'm sure PVO likened his stunt to Laurie Oakes showing up at the 2010 press club in an election year with Julia Gillard and detailing those infamous meetings between Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. The difference between that and what PVO did is that we knew exactly who the leaker was. We knew who both parties were in that exchange, and it was of deep political interest. In this case, we don't know who another party is, and therefore, can you actually put it to air? Can you actually report it? And can you rely on the credibility of the exchange? And this is something that is 2 years ago, and it says a lot about the media that in the preceding days, all they've talked about is this text message where you've got, bigger issues. You've got inflation, you've got petrol prices, you've got COVID restrictions, you've got all sorts of other issues that mainstream Australians are focused on. Yet we're focused on this. As far as the federal court matter goes, I'm not one to dive in and make accusations at PVO. We've only seen the other claim so far, which has things like that he didn't meet her, Tegan George, for coffee and wasn't complimentary about some of her tweets. So we really need to see Channel 10's end of that claim defending him before we make any judgment on PVO there.
Well said. And Kel, that standard that we apply to that story, which I do think we have to abide by, it's kind of a double standard with this Prime Minister story, with the text messages. You get one side, you can't scrutinise the story because you don't know who said it, if they said it at all. It's fairly strong comments from Greg Hunt appearing to refute that there's even a person at all. What do you make of this from a journalistic ethics point of view?
Journalistically, I think what was shameful was using the National Press Club question time to ask it. It's interesting. Peter Van Onselen wrote a column for The Australian this week justifying using the time at the National Press Club to ask this question. Now, the very fact that he knew he had to defend it, knew what he did was wrong. These text messages, if they really exist, are 2 years old. They are not this day's story. They're not this week's story. They're not even this year's story. So what he did was he wasted good time at the National Press Club when a real journalist with a proper question could have got up and asked a question, and he trotted out a story which is a bit of scuttlebutt, a bit of, dirt digging, that kind of thing. That doesn't belong at the National Press Club. Using that forum to ask that question was, I think, shameful. He's got his own forums. He could have run the story on 10 News. He could have run it on The Project. He could have put out a press release to draw attention to it, and then it would have been treated with the weight that it deserves. Namely, these are supposedly 2-year-old text messages. Do they matter these days? Not very much. Politicians sometimes fall out with each other. Does that matter? Not very much. Instead of that, he did this grandstanding clown act of, I'm going to do it at the National Press Club on live television, live national television, and he wrote to defend it. He knows he's got to defend it. He knows his behaviour was indefensible.
Yep, and he did it 25 minutes after he was named, and he was in hot water himself. Makes me very suspicious.